when you consider the benefits of a philosophy degree, we're making better citizens, better jurors, people who can think better. And if you're not as persuaded by rhetoric, you're going to be a better voter, say. It diminishes. Yeah, that's a car. Diminishes. That's Blackbird's car. But
you're gonna have some cutting to do.
Yeah.
But I suspect that at the present time, what we might call ordinary language philosophy or linguistic philosophy, in the sense in which Blackburn is speaking of it, is probably defunct or not a particularly active area of philosophy at the moment, when it's pretty much been replaced by what we might call philosophy of language, as represented by people like Chomsky and Davidson, and perhaps Quine on the periphery. Today, philosophy of language tends to be based more on linguistics and on problems of the philosophy of communication. And as he mentioned, the philosophy of mind, what it is to be a language user.
But what about speech acts? Is that an area that's defunct, the whole area of implicature? And
not a lot of discussion of it in the literature these days, except under the heading of what you might call pragmatics.
The fallacy of getting the words slightly wrong, you could call it, or using the wrong words, like in that article we discussed earlier. Subtle misuses of words that are at the root of a lot of political controversy, arguments of the day, that philosophy seems best suited from any other subject to expose, allow people to detect.
Yeah, I think you're perfectly on target there in that philosophical training is one of the best forms of cueing you into how words may be misused.
And so much of that goes on. Because
especially in the political season, for example. But, politics is filled with all sorts of weasel wording, and sometimes deliberate, sometimes accidental. But well, it teaches you, as you said, to be sensitive to the nuances of language and the misuses of language. It enables you to sort of learn to think outside the box.
Avoid the easy generalization.
Right. Yeah, and
be more attuned to fact.
To sort of extend yourself beyond the limitations of your own culture. That if you study it not for the sake of the wealthy living, but for the sake of the learning. All of the liberal arts, they're the arts that make men free. The arts that liber here means free, and
free of a paycheck.
Free of a paycheck, free of ignorance, free of dominance by sort of cultural limitations.
Free of dominance by dogmas or doctrines that aren't properly put together, that shouldn't be convincing.
Yeah, these are the skills of communication and interpretation that aren't necessarily taught in other disciplines, like at least not in the same way or to the same extent, such as engineering or accounting or...
Well, there is no one answer, and a lot of that is what the depth of philosophy is. In a commonsensical way, like when a tree falls in the woods doesn't make a sound. A lot of these sort of test questions in philosophy are just paradoxes or conundrums, because they ask for one answer when you have an ambiguity and we get puzzled. That question is still answered wrong by so many people.
Which one?
Wow, what tree falls in the woods.
Well, let's put it this way: there are a number of different answers people give to it.
Yeah. But what I consider the right one is to say, well, it depends on which sense of sound. One where sound waves are emitted, whether or not there's a hearer or not. In other words, you define sound psychologically as something heard.
Or another way people will talk about it. Well, there's a difference between sound and noise.
Oh yeah.
That's another way of distinguishing the subjective experience of sound and the vibrations, even if no one's there to have the subjective experience of them.
I think it's the mark of a good philosopher to be able to readily spot bogus questions, ambiguities in the course of discussion, whether it's listening to commentary on TV or the radio or reading an article. Not getting. Yeah,
I'm not sure it's restricted to philosophers, though. I mean, that's a big part of what training in philosophy involves. But good training in rhetoric involves that. Good training in the study of languages in general involves developing such skills.
And that the sophist, Protagoras, might look on to the side now and say, "You call this the edifice built on the Socratic tradition? And look at the results. I'll match any of my students against yours. Mine speak like Demosthenes. I have them speaking with marbles in their mouths in the sea. And you got kids who can't put two words together."
But the interesting thing about both the Socratic and the sophistic traditions is that they both tend to operate in a kind of one-on-one way. But with the sophists, it's a kind of appearance because, basically, even though the sophists are speaking to, say, somebody who asks some questions, he's really performing for an audience.
Grandstanding,
and trying to get himself a reputation, so that other people will then come to hire him. So you're always playing to the grandstand as a sophist. Whereas Socrates' claim is that he's really interested in how well the person he's actually talking to understands, and it doesn't really matter how the audience really responds to what's going on. That's why the Meno is such a marvelous dialogue, because you get both of those styles of exposition presented in them. Meno is always, at least at the beginning, trying to show himself off to all the other people around, and Socrates is always, asking, well, how well do you really understand this, my boy?
Yeah.
You notice the very short dialogues are ones in which the people don't seem to be very bright. But the long dialogues, like the Republic, like the Phaedrus, the brighter the character, the longer the dialogue is going to be. If you have a number of characters in sequence, you find that you're going up a scale of intelligence and ability to argue and present different viewpoints and so on. So I mean, the Republic is 450 pages long or so on, and then Thrasymachus comes along, and then the quality of the dialogue jumps up.
Okay. So long as you don't feel like, so long as you don't groan after the sophist says something, you say like, well, that an intelligent man, a leading intellect of the time, wouldn't make such a idiotic statement, and it's too much lobbing up softballs.
Yeah.
For Socrates. That's the impression I got.
I mean, in one sense, Meno is very bright, but he's not very well educated, very well trained in how to make use of the tools of rhetoric and logic. But as the discussion goes along, you notice that he begins to spot what can be done with them. He sees what Socrates is doing.